He vanished from a town that doesn't exist on any map. No records, no roads, no proof it ever existed. Just a note left behind. If I don't come back, it means I found it. That was 20 years ago. And now, someone just found his final diary entry. The date inside? 2 days after he disappeared. Before we begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? And if this story haunts you the way it haunted me, consider subscribing. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Before we begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Seeing your check-ins keeps this community alive. Now, here's what really happened. Reuben Lamont Griggs had a habit of disappearing from conversations, even before he vanished for real. He would nod politely, then drift off mid-sentence, like his mind had stepped outside for a walk. Most folks thought it was just the way he was wired, quiet, always scribbling in those ragged notebooks of his. But his mother, Claudine Griggs, said she could feel something shifting in him that final winter. Something she didn't have words for. Something dark. Their house sat off Myrtle Street, tucked between a boarded-up grocery and the old Pentecostal church with a rusting bell tower. Reuben's bedroom window faced the alley. At night, Claudine said she'd catch glimpses of him sitting cross-legged on the floor, his lamp flickering, hunched over his diary like it was a doorway instead of a book. That morning, March 12th, 1988, she cooked eggs and toast just like always. Reuben came down in a gray hoodie and work boots, same as he wore every Saturday. He didn't speak much, just kissed her cheek and said, "I'll be gone a bit today, but I'll be back by dark." She remembered the way he looked at her. Not in a hurry, not anxious. Peaceful. Too peaceful. By nightfall, he hadn't returned. Claudine waited with the porch light on. By midnight, she was calling hospitals. By 3 a.m., she walked to the police station in her nightgown and slippers. A white officer told her he was likely blowing off steam and would probably come crawling back by Monday. They never filed a proper report. It was Valina, Reuben's 14-year-old sister, who found the note. She'd slipped into his room the next morning looking for his cassette recorder. Instead, she found a single sheet of paper folded inside his sketchbook. It read, "I'm going where I won't be followed. If I don't come back, it means I found it." Valina didn't understand what it meant, and Claudine refused to accept it as a goodbye. "Found what?" she kept repeating. "Where's it? Where would he go with no clothes, no money, and no goodbye?" A neighbor, Miss Bernadine, mentioned seeing Reuben walking toward the old bus stop near 3rd and Cherry the day he left. But there hadn't been a functioning Greyhound stop there in over a decade. Just a rotting wooden bench with vines growing through the cracks. That Monday, Claudine marched into the Pine Bluff Police Department with a photo of her son, a folder full of his sketches, and the note. She demanded someone look into a place he kept mentioning in his journals, a name she couldn't find on any map. Sulfur Hollow. Detective Darnell McGee, one of the only black officers in the county, was the only one who took her seriously. He'd heard the name before once years back. An old man at a retirement home near Desha County had muttered it in a story about a town they washed away. McGee opened a file, but it went nowhere. No records, no town charter, nothing in the land registry. Claudine kept pushing, writing letters to state representatives, begging church members to help her search. Most people thought Reuben had simply run off. They whispered about drugs, about a secret girlfriend. Some even suggested suicide. But Claudine knew better. Reuben didn't just disappear. He unraveled, slowly, quietly, like a thread being pulled from somewhere deep. Otis Tillery, Reuben's best friend since junior high, remembered a conversation they'd had a week before he vanished. They were both working at Washburn Printing, doing night shifts. Reuben had brought in one of his notebooks, flipped it open to a drawing of an old wooden gate in a forest clearing. Underneath, it was written, "No roads. No clocks, just the hollow." Otis asked where it was, and Reuben just smiled. Not here, but not far. That was the last time Otis saw him. Claudine kept Reuben's room exactly the same. She washed his sheets every Sunday, dusted his bookshelf, and played his favorite gospel records on a loop. Valina said it felt like living in a haunted house, but not from ghosts, from silence. As months passed, Then years, Claudine's calls to the police were met with sighs and vague condolences. McGee retired in 1994, but he never threw away Reuben's file. He kept it locked in his home cabinet, behind his Bible. In 2002, Claudine began to lose her memory. By 2006, she was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. But even when she forgot her own birthday, she never forgot Reuben's. Valina, now grown, moved to North Little Rock. She had a child of her own, a daughter named Micaiah, who was just old enough to start asking about the uncle whose photo hung on Grandma's wall. Then in 2008, everything changed. Valina was hunting for used furniture at a storage auction. One of the abandoned units she won for $65 was mostly junk, old lamps, torn recliners, soggy cardboard boxes. But in a shoebox inside a locked drawer, she found something that stopped her heart. A composition notebook, the same kind Reuben used. Inside, drawings, symbols, maps, and one final entry, dated March 14th, 1988, 2 days after he disappeared. It was in his handwriting, faded, shaky, but undeniably him. Valina couldn't breathe. She flipped to the last page, where a message was written in red ink. If this ever makes it back, I didn't leave because I hated life. I left because I saw something more. She called Officer McGee that same night. When he picked up, all Valina said was, "I found Reuben's diary," and the line went dead quiet. Not a sound. Then, slowly, McGee spoke. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and bring it to me. Tonight." The past, once silent, had just begun to speak again. Retired Officer Darnell McGee hadn't thought about Sulfur Hollow in years. He kept the old file in a fireproof box beneath his bed, along with a handful of other cases that never sat right with him. But the moment Valina Griggs said Reuben's name, it was like time folded in on itself. He could still see Claudine storming into the station back in '88, trembling with anger, her pressed church coat buttoned all the way to her throat. She'd slapped Reuben's journal on the desk and said, "You see this? My baby didn't just vanish. He was taken." And now, 20 years later, her daughter stood in McGee's living room with that same fire in her eyes and a diary in her hands. Valina placed the shoebox on the coffee table and slowly peeled back the lid. The composition notebook inside looked warped, water-stained, and barely held together. But when McGee touched the cover, he felt a chill run down his spine. He opened it. Inside were sketches of winding roads that didn't lead anywhere. Trees with eyes. Maps of a clearing labeled the Hollow. But the most haunting page was a pencil drawing of a wooden gate built into the side of a hill, half buried in vines. Above it, written in shaky block letters. No roads. No clocks. Just the Hollow. Valina leaned forward, whispering. That's what Otis said Reuben told him before he disappeared. That exact phrase. McGee didn't respond. He flipped to the last entry, the one dated March 14th, 1988, 2 days after Reuben had already vanished. The handwriting was faint but legible. The ink bled at the edges, as if written in humidity. The final line read, "If you find this, I've already crossed." They sat in silence. The only sound was the ceiling fan ticking above their heads. "Where did you say you found it?" McGee finally asked. Valina explained how she'd won the storage unit. How the box was hidden inside a locked drawer of a broken desk, under a stack of moldy calendars. She hadn't seen a name on anything else, just the diary, and a cassette labeled, "Play When It Rains." McGee's brow furrowed. That's not coincidence. That's timing. He stood and walked to the bookshelf. From the top shelf, he pulled out an old manila envelope. Inside was the original 1988 map survey he'd copied from county archives. On it, near the southeast edge of Lincoln County, was a faint marking in pencil. Sulfur Hollow. St. Unknown. The name wasn't typed. It was handwritten, as if someone tried to add it long after the map had been filed. "That's all we ever had," McGee said. "That mark right there. No census data. No county records. The only mentions were from oral histories, old folks saying their grandparents used to know about it. Then they said the state flooded it. But there's no dam out there," Valina replied. "Exactly." McGee pulled another paper from the envelope, an old newspaper clipping from 1952. The headline read, "A-Team vanished from outdoor revival in Sulfur Hollow." There was no follow-up, no bodies found, just a note from the sheriff saying the land had been reclaimed for state use the following year. Valina felt a cold knot form in her chest. "So it was real," she whispered. "Sulfur Hollow existed." McGee nodded. "I believe it did, but I also believe someone wanted it forgotten." He flipped through Reuben's diary again, landing on a sketch of an arch made of stone, with trees twisted around it like fingers. At the bottom was a scrawled note, "The place where the air stops." Valina didn't know what that meant, but McGee did. His cousin, Vernon, had been a surveyor in Lincoln County back in the 1970s. Vernon once told him there were spots in the forest so quiet, so unnaturally still, that your ears would ring from the silence. "I need to go out there," Valina said. McGee looked up sharply. "It's been decades. The roads are grown over. The only way in is by foot, and even then, you're walking into old land. Land people left alone for a reason." Valina didn't flinch. "My brother walked into it alone. I can at least walk into it with answers." The rain started that night. A low, rolling storm that tapped against McGee's window like someone knocking from the other side. Valina stayed the night, sleeping on the couch with the diary under her arm. Around 3 a.m., she awoke to the sound of static. The cassette player McGee had pulled out, an old Magnavox unit from the back closet, was running. But no one had touched it. The tape inside was spinning. She sat up slowly and heard it. Reuben's voice. He sounded calm, detached, like someone speaking from underwater. "If you're hearing this, then it means I didn't come back. But don't cry for me. I didn't run. I saw something in the trees. It knew me. It called me by name." Valina covered her mouth, eyes wide. "I met a man named Alphonse," Reuben continued. "He wore white and smelled like lilies. He said there's no time here. No clocks. Just a hollow. And if I followed him, I'd understand what I'd always felt but could never explain." The tape clicked off. Silence. McGee stood in the hallway. He hadn't slept either. "He made another tape once," McGee said. "Back in '87. Left it at the print shop. Said it was just sound experiments. Otis told me it had river noises and whispering. When Otis asked about it, Reuben laughed and said, 'It's not a river. It's a door.'" Valina pressed her hand over her heart. Something was happening. Something real. And tomorrow, they would go find the place no one wanted to believe existed. Sulfur Hollow was calling. They set out just after dawn. The air was damp, the sky a washed-out gray that promised more rain by nightfall. McGee's truck rattled over the old gravel back roads outside of Pine Bluff, the wheels groaning as they climbed toward the forest edge. Valina sat in the passenger seat, gripping Reuben's diary in her lap like it might dissolve if she let go. She hadn't slept much, not with his voice still echoing in her head from the tape. Not after hearing her brother say words that made no earthly sense. But they felt true. "If I followed him, I'd understand what I'd always felt but could never explain." McGee had packed a backpack with water, a flashlight, an old Smith & Wesson, and a 1949 hand-drawn map that still showed a faint trace of Sulfur Hollow near the Bayou Bartholomew wetlands. It wasn't on any modern satellite image. Nothing but blank green terrain where a town was once whispered to be. "You sure about this?" McGee asked, easing the truck to a stop at the edge of a narrow game trail. Valina opened the door without answering. For 2 hours, they walked through tangled brush, stepping over fallen limbs and through patches of knee-deep water. No sound but crows, wind, and their own breathing. Reuben's diary pages had sketches of trees shaped like claws and stone markers with spirals carved into them. At first, it felt like nonsense. Then they saw one. A small stone, half covered in moss, with the same spiral pattern sketched in Reuben's book. Valina stopped cold. "McGee," she whispered. "This is it." The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. The air grew still. Sound dulled. No birds, no wind, just pressure like something waiting to exhale. Valina found herself whispering without meaning to. Every footstep felt like a trespass. They reached a shallow ravine choked with vines. On the far side, covered in lichen and half swallowed by earth, was what looked like the curved remains of an old wooden arch. It had collapsed long ago, but the rotted beams still bent in a perfect half circle. Carved into the top plank, barely visible under the grime, were 5 letters. HLLOW. McGee wiped the wood with his sleeve, revealing a second line carved underneath. He found what he was looking for. Valina sank to her knees. She ran her fingers over the carved letters and felt her throat tighten. "He was here," she said. "This is real." McGee looked around, scanning the trees, the mud, the shadows. "There should have been buildings," he said softly. "Foundations, chimneys, wells, but there's nothing left." Valina pulled the diary open to a drawing of that exact arch. On the next page, a series of rough sketches showed Reuben standing next to someone in a white suit, always near payphones or water, always at the edge of the frame. Never quite full-faced. "Mr. Alphonse, do you think he was real?" Valina asked. "The man in the suit?" McGee didn't answer right away. There's always been stories like this. People seeing strangers before they disappear. Especially in places like this. Old towns, cut-off communities. Sometimes it's grief, sometimes trauma. Sometimes. He didn't finish. Valina stood and walked a few paces ahead. Beneath a large oak tree, she saw another stone, flat, about 2 feet wide, almost like a grave marker. On it were initials, carved faintly. RLG. She pressed her hand against her chest. "Reuben Lamont Griggs," she said aloud. She knelt down beside the stone, pulled out the tape from her pocket, and held it up. "He left this. For someone. For me. For Mom." McGee watched her quietly. He remembered Claudine sitting in his office in '88, whispering to herself, praying under her breath. "I know he's not gone," she had said. "He just found somewhere I can't reach." Valina brushed leaves off the stone, revealing more beneath. The carving continued. "You'll know when it's time to come home." She sat beside the marker in silence. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't feel confused. She didn't feel angry or lost. She felt close. And something caught her attention, a scrap of fabric poking out of the dirt just beside the stone. She tugged it free and held it up. It was a piece of a gray hoodie sleeve. Her brother's hoodie. She started to cry. Not from fear. From knowing. McGee knelt beside her. "We should go soon. It's gonna storm." Valina shook her head. "Not yet. Just give me a minute." Back in town, Otis Tillery had been waiting by his phone all day. He still lived in the same house, still ran the same tiny screen printing press from his garage. When Valina called, her voice was soft but firm. "We found it, Otis. The hollow. It's real." Otis didn't speak at first. Then he said, "I believed him, you know. All those years. I just didn't know what to do with it." Valina paused. "Do you remember when he said it wasn't a place, but a moment?" "Yeah. I think he meant it." That night, she sat on the porch of her mother's old house. Claudine had passed 2 years earlier, but her porch swing still creaked like it always had. Valina watched the storm roll in, wind curling around the porch columns. She took out the cassette and pressed play. It was a longer message this time, more than just whispers. Reuben's voice was steadier, almost happy. "I saw something beautiful, Vel, something I can't explain. I think it's a place between stories. I think it's where people go when they don't want to be found, but still want to be remembered." She held the tape to her chest as the thunder rolled closer. He was never really gone, just waiting. In the hollow. Bayou Bartholomew, Arkansas, March 2008. The road narrowed into nothing. What started as a gravel path faded into damp earth and roots, swallowed by brush and silence. McGee cut the engine and checked the map again. Reuben's sketch matched the hand-drawn 1949 survey almost exactly. No GPS showed it. No signs. Just forest. Thick, swampy, and waiting. Valina stepped out first. The air smelled like copper and wet leaves. Otis followed, his camcorder slung around his neck. No one spoke. Not yet. They hiked in single file, ducking under vines, boots sinking into the soft ground as they moved deeper into the woods. It felt like stepping back in time. The only sound was water dripping from branches and the low buzz of insects. No birds. No wind. Just the breathless pressure of somewhere forgotten. McGee stopped near clearing. He held up a hand. We're close. They moved into a shallow basin, sunken into the earth like a bowl. At the far end, partially buried beneath moss and soil, was a broken foundation, slabs of concrete and brick overrun with roots. Otis raised the camera slowly. Holy hell! Valina approached it cautiously. She ran her hand along the crumbling edge of what once might have been a church or meeting hall. The stone was warm, like it held memory. There just ahead sat a low slab of rock cut, not natural. A marker. McGee moved to it and brushed the moss aside with his sleeve. Etched into the stone, weather-worn but still clear, were 5 words. Reuben Lamont Griggs, 1988. He found what he was looking for. Valina covered her mouth. I don't understand, she whispered. He carved his name? No, McGee said. Someone else did. Valina dropped to her knees. Her fingers hovered over the letters, trembling. This is a grave? I don't think so, McGee said. But it's a monument. A place of crossing. Otis stepped forward, his voice hoarse. He told me something once. A week before he vanished. They both looked at him. He said the world had seams. Places you could step through if you were quiet enough. Said he thought Sulfur Hollow was one of them. A spiritual crossing. Valina stood slowly. He thought he could talk to Dad again, didn't he? Otis nodded. Yeah. Claudine had never spoken about her husband's death. Not to Valina, not to Reuben. But he'd carried the loss in his chest like a wound that never closed. Their father had died suddenly, back in '83. Heart attack. Alone in a borrowed truck off Highway 11. Reuben was the one who identified the body. And now he'd followed the silence into the woods, looking for him. Valina looked up. Cicadas had begun screaming in the trees, sudden and loud, like the forest was exhaling. The light dimmed as clouds gathered above the treetops. McGee placed a hand on her shoulder. He found something here. I don't think it was death, but it wasn't this world either. Valina didn't speak. She just knelt beside the stone, pulled Reuben's diary from her backpack, and opened to the map. At the center of the page, drawn over and over again, was this very clearing. Otis stepped back and filmed the area. People are going to think we made this up, he muttered. Like a damn folktale. McGee stared into the trees. Maybe we're not supposed to explain it. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Valina wiped the stone clean one last time, then stood. I want to leave something. She opened her palm. And it was the silver chain her mother used to wear, Claudine's old prayer charm, the one she never took off except to sleep. Valina placed it beside Reuben's name on the stone, gently pressing it into the moss. He was never alone, she said. She prayed for him every night, even when she forgot her own name. As if the forest had heard, the wind shifted. That night, Claudine Griggs passed away in her sleep, alone in her home, with the candles still burning by Reuben's photo. Her hands folded across her chest. Peaceful. Valina got the call just past midnight. She didn't cry. She sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, He's waiting for you, Mama. And somewhere in the trees, the cicadas screamed again. The man had no face. Not in the way that meant unknown, but in the literal sense. Reuben's sketches, dozens of them, scattered through the final third of the diary, showed a tall figure in a crisp white suit, always drawn from the side or from behind. The head was smooth, oval, untouched by features. Sometimes he held a briefcase. Sometimes he stood beneath a streetlight. And sometimes he was simply there, watching. Valina sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by the diary's final pages, studying them like blueprints. Each time the figure appeared, it was near water, a creek, a reservoir, a payphone beside a drainage ditch. In one sketch, he was stepping into the Bayou Bartholomew itself, the water calm around his ankles, his body so stiff he looked carved from marble. It wasn't just drawings. Reuben had written about him, too. Saw him again by the church fence. Same suit. No footprints. No birds when he's near. Told me the place between places is close. That I'm almost there. Valina turned the page and found a newspaper clipping Reuben had taped in. A story so faded she could barely read it. McGee helped her scan and enhance the image on his old home printer, the ink lines fuzzy but legible enough. The article was from July 1952. A headline at the top read, Preacher and 18 followers vanished during revival near Sulfur Hollow. The article described a tent revival that took place over several nights on disputed farmland south of Pine Bluff. A preacher named Alphonse Greeley, well known in the black community for his prophetic style and claims of divine thresholds, had led the service. According to the article, the congregation vanished after the third night. No witnesses, no footprints, no remains. McGee placed the printout beside Reuben's sketch of Mr. Alphonse. The names match, McGee said. If Reuben's Alphonse and this preacher are the same. They are, Valina interrupted. He wasn't imagining it. He was following him. They drove to Little Rock later that day to visit a small church that Reuben had mentioned in his earliest diary entries, Mount Calvary Tabernacle. It still stood, wedged between a vacant lot and a rundown liquor store. The paint was peeling, but the doors were open. A thin woman in a lavender head wrap greeted them at the entrance. "You here for the choir or the pantry box?" she asked. "Neither," Valina said. "I'm looking into something from a long time ago." A preacher named Alphonse Greeley. The woman's face stiffened. "We don't say that name in this building." McGee stepped in. "Ma'am, we're not trying to stir anything up. We just want to know if anyone's seen a man in a white suit." The woman didn't blink. "Last Sunday, standing across the street before service. Same as when I was a child. Always outside, always watching. Pastor said it's just a drifter. But he never walks. He just appears." She stepped back inside without another word. That evening, Valina went home and unpacked a small metal lockbox she hadn't touched in years. Inside were 2 photos, some costume jewelry, and a folded note she'd written to Reuben when she was 10. At the bottom of the box was a broken necklace, his from childhood, and a payphone token they used to play with. The token gave her an idea. She returned to the diary and flipped to a sketch of a payphone. Reuben had labeled it Water Street in Geyer Springs. She typed the cross streets into a map. There was no payphone there anymore, but the building beside it, a shuttered laundromat, was still standing. She drove there the next morning. The sky was gray again, humming with energy. When she pulled up to the intersection, she saw the rusted shell of what used to be the phone stand. The booth was gone, but the concrete slab was still there, a rectangle of absence. She stood there for several minutes. Then the phone in her pocket began to ring. It wasn't a ringtone she recognized. The screen was black. No caller ID. No incoming number. She answered. Nothing. Just soft static. Then a humming. Low. Gentle. Familiar. Reuben. He used to hum that exact tune when he couldn't sleep. A slow, rising melody he'd made up as a child. Valina pressed the phone to her ear and closed her eyes. The humming continued, then stopped, and the line went dead. She dropped to the ground beside the old slab and cried. Across town, McGee received a letter at his front door with no stamp, no return address. Inside was a slip of thick paper that looked like it had been ripped from a Bible. Scrawled in red ink were 7 words. Tell Valina he was never alone. That night, Valina sat on her mother's porch, diary in her lap, fingers tracing the margin notes Reuben had left behind. Saw Alphonse again by the drainage ditch. He said memory is a map. Said if you follow it long enough, it'll take you home. She looked up at the sky. The stars were out, faint but visible behind the clouds. Somewhere between heaven and nowhere, her brother had followed a voice only he could hear. And someone, or something, had followed him back. She didn't need answers anymore. She needed the truth she already knew. Reuben hadn't run. He hadn't lost his mind. He had simply found something no one else could see. A doorway, a line, a threshold, and someone had held it open for him. North Little Rock, Arkansas, March 2008. Valina waited until midnight to open the diary again. She sat at her mother's kitchen table, a single lamp casting warm gold across the wood grain. The house was silent now. No Claudine lighting candles in the living room. No gospel playing from the corner radio. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of what she hadn't yet read. Reuben's diary had always been messy. Half-thoughts, loose sketches, phrases scratched out and rewritten. But the last few pages were different. They weren't frantic. They weren't cryptic. They were deliberate. Written in dark blue ink, pressed hard into the paper. Page after page in full sentences. Reuben's voice was clear, steady, even warm. Not like someone in fear, but like someone saying goodbye. Valina began to read. I know this will be hard to believe. Maybe you'll think I lost my mind. But I need you to know, I was more awake out there than I've ever been. I followed the signs because they follow me first. The hollow wasn't a place on a map. It was a sound, a pressure, like a door inside my chest opening slowly. I saw Alphonse for the first time by the train tracks. He didn't speak with words. He didn't need to. I remembered things just by looking at him. Mom's hands, Dad's laugh, the smell of wood smoke and Sunday afternoons. He told me the hollow was a moment, not a destination. That's why I left. Not to die, not to run, but to understand the way time bends when you stand still long enough. Valina paused, the page trembling in her hands. Her throat tightened. She could still hear Reuben's voice humming from the phone call, still feel the heat of the payphone slab beneath her knees. She turned the page. You'll think I disappeared, but I didn't. I stepped sideways. In the hollow, there's no pain, no clocks, no guilt. I waited for someone to come looking, but I knew you'd be the one. You were always the one who listened between the words. I'm sorry I left you, but I didn't forget you. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. Sometimes I see Mom lighting candles. I see Otis listening to music. I see you, Vel, folding paper stars like we used to. These aren't dreams. They're echoes. The hollow lets you watch without touching. I wish I could have told you this face to face. But if you're reading this, it means you followed the thread I left. And that means you're ready to let go. I'm not lost. I'm just waiting. Valina exhaled slowly, laying her palm flat against the page. He never said goodbye. Not once. Every sentence felt like a bridge. Words designed to reach her across years, across grief, across whatever liminal space he'd chosen to cross into. She flipped to the very last entry. No date, just a page number. It read, "You'll know when it's time to come home." The ink was thicker, like it had been written with more pressure. The final period was smeared slightly, as if his hand had lingered there. She closed the book. The following morning, Valina and Otis drove back out to Bayou Bartholomew. McGee had already gone ahead and cleared a path with a machete, marking the trees with red fabric strips. The forest didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt solemn, reverent. When they reached the clearing, the cicadas had already begun screaming. The stone slab where Reuben's name was etched still stood. The moss had dried in the sun. Claudine's silver prayer charm still glinted faintly at the base. Valina pulled the diary from her bag and held it one last time. "This belongs here," she whispered. She knelt beside the slab and dug gently into the earth with her hands. Otis offered her his pocket knife to help loosen the soil. Together, they buried the diary beneath the stone, wrapped in cloth, sealed in a plastic case. Valina took a moment. Then she used the same knife to carve something into the other side of the slab. VEG 2008. A soft breeze passed through the trees as she stood. The clearing was quiet now. No birds, no insects, just silence. Otis took a photo. Not for proof, not for sharing. Just to remember. To remember the day someone came home, even if not in the way the world understood. Back in town, life continued. The church bells rang. The store opened late. Kids biked past the post office, shouting over the hum of the air. But something had shifted inside Valina. A tension that had lived under her skin for 2 decades had finally released. She no longer needed to prove anything. Her brother was never lost. He had simply moved past the reach of maps. Later that week, she received one last envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single square of parchment with faded handwriting. Just one line. The town never needed a map. It only needed memory. She smiled, then closed the envelope and turned out the light.